Hello, gentlemen. I present to you unity theory, the unification of three theories, Roy's triune model, my paradoxism, and Daniel's spiralism, or JCT, standing for jumping continuity theory, which is a paradox to be resolved, by the way. We'll explain that later. All right, so I believe there are 3/4 types of theories of everything that really are all inclusive. They are technically all interrelated, of course. You're going to have elements of each one within each one, but for them to be complete, they need to come together. So the first one is identitarian. So it describes the ultimate identity or what reality is. So this necessarily is going to be the simplest one. Then the second one is functional, which is a theory that describes how this ultimate truth or reality emerges and how it functions from the human-centered view. And then predictive. So this is the theory that describes patterns and extrapolates future cycles. So making predictions and that sort of thing. And this is what science is really all about. A lot of the unification theory of quantum physics and classical or quantum mechanics and classical physics is essentially a predictive theory of everything. That has some functions to it, of course. All right. So a complete theory, in my view, would be the combination of those three, and it would include a self-description, and that is what unity theory is. It is the self-description of the three parts that come together, and those three parts are our three theories. So if we look on the right here, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into what these theories are. Triunity shows, so truth is the absolute and a singular state. There are many words for it: potential, void, whatever, existence, God. So triunity shows what this truth is by encompassing the two other paradoxes. And we're going to see how later. Paradoxism shows how triunity and spiralism function and then proves them logically. So it reconciles everything. That's what it does. So it's a system of duality, basically. So when we think of triunity, paradoxism should be seen as duality, because a paradox is the combination of, or the connection of two things that are seemingly contradictory. But paradoxes are also a triunity, and we're going to see that later as well. So a triune, so I can explain it now real quick. A triangle necessarily includes its base, so two other points. So it includes duality within it. But because duality comes from the triune, the synthesis at the top, the zero, the potential, then paradoxes themselves, so an infinite loop, are really a superposition. So if I go to this right here, look at this paradox. You have one side, two sides, and then the middle, the intersection, the superposition between those two sides. So that is a triunity in itself. So duality is triality, and triality is duality. They mutually define each other. Then we have spiralism. This shows how the singular state expresses itself and predicts its cycles in the infinite present. That is something Daniel will have to explain more in detail. I can explain it to a certain degree, but I've understood it to this degree where I can really state it that way. So yeah, this is ultimately the infinite spiral that comes after triunity and duality coming or emerging together. So that essentially leads us to this right here. So first, let's try to understand the triality and duality reconciliation, and out emerges infinity, and that's where spiralism comes in. So what I just explained, it's more visual. We have it here. Zero is always the superposition state, the potential. So think of zero as potential, which is the absolute truth, or the fundamental. And then you have here on the left the superposition. So superposition, the idea, the concept of 0, 1, and that are together. That would be paradoxism there, like I said. And on the other side, we have all the other numbers in the series, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up into infinity or ad infinitum. So like I said, these two mutually define this one and vice versa. And this is the trial. So I guess I explained it, and I really should have gone to this slide to explain it. So spirality, however, how infinity emerges, is a paradox that is resolved when we notice that the infinite series of numbers are all superposed to return to the source potential. So that means that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? That one, don't forget, is a superposition state. So through the superposition that we're already on the left, we return to 0 or potential. So it all collapses, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is a superposition. It's actually nothing. There is no 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and because it's in a superposition, and then it goes back up to trial. So we go from right to left to up, but back down, right? The triality always includes the dual aspects of itself. Therefore, it emerges an infinite series of numbers, and out of those numbers emerges dimensions, and that's something that I explain in my philosophy in the paradoxism side. So when I say there is and there is not a paradox, or there is a reality and there is not, like existence and non-existence are superimposed onto each other, this is the clear way to understand that. All right. So yeah, these two red dots, just to mention real quick, show that the duality of paradox is a triune, and that the triune includes duality. Right? So like I said, one side, two sides, the superposition, the infinite, and then of course the intersection between both. So the superposition of a superposition and infinity is ultimately the triality. So yeah, another way to explain that. So let's move forward into this here. So I've explained it in a certain way, but we're going to unpack it a little bit to have a semantic definition. So this is where we start to see how it applies to language, because language is essentially what's been keeping us from really encompassing everything and having a theory of everything. So unity will be shown a little bit more clearly here as well. You have these three columns, so that's the triune. And in these three columns, really the semantic legend here shows that these three columns are the superposition that I'm talking about, that I explained through the triangle. So when I say negative and positive, they ultimately cancel themselves out to be neutral. Or I can say superposition and infinity, which is really just potential. So this carries forward, and the very first two axioms that derive from this triune that we have here, what I call the Meta-Triune. This Meta-Triune shows that it distributes itself throughout the system within infinity. So you're always going to see triality, or the trial duality, this triune / dual aspect of reality in everything, right? So the very first two axioms that emerge together, of course, they're intrinsically linked after this Meta-Triune. So this is the regular triune, is here. The first axiom is zero potential, of course. It's always the very first thing, the fundamental. And we discovered this about 500 years ago. It's the cogito. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. However, we have to reduce things to their simplest aspects. It's not I think, therefore I am. It's I am thinking. Describing the cogito, I think, therefore I am, is you can reduce it to one more thing, which is I am thinking, or I am, right? Am I? It's another one, or just I. So you can always reduce back to zero and nothingness, but we're using the triune to start to try to understand the link between language and absolute truth. So this is why we're going to use three things. I am thinking. All right, that axiom of zero pure potential, its semantic translation is I am thinking. Now, we need to define the language that we use so that we can extract meaning. Therefore, I is a function of identity. We just describe that as identity. Am is a function of being, all right, existing. And thinking is a function of thought. And thinking is thinking. Therefore, uh, this first axiom really is the most fundamental. It shows you that there's a source, there really is a fundamental truth, and it generates, by being self-referential, it generates the world. Here's the second axiom that was provided by Roy, and the second axiom is this is happening. So this statement, this is happening, is just the semantic translation of the superposition of paradoxism, right? The axiom of superposition, two things being really one thing, but two things at the same time. So that's the paradox. Uh, let's look at it and look at its definition. So this implies an object, or think about it this way: matter energy, E equals mc squared, right? So this is a function of an object. Is a function of a state, and happening is a function of space-time. And I'm going to explain that in a sec. But think about is here. Is the same thing as am, right? Am is just personal, first person view. Is a projection, right? And therefore, um, you can see how this duality, that these two axioms, is the duality that is inclusive within the triality. That's the reconciliation there. And therefore, everything that is generated dualistically will collapse back, and you're going to see a symmetry of identity, or the same truth going upwards in the levels of axioms or of statements. So that is very abstract, I know, but let's just look at it this way. The state, being, same thing as potential. So you can basically all reduce these to the same thing, just like you can reduce in every column always going up. So we're going to go with the last axiom here, or the second one. This object, right? An object is something that it's an identity. Well, it has an identity, and this identity emerges from the superposition. So just like we collapse the center column here, we could do that on this side, and same thing with happening in space-time. But first, let's dive into happening in space-time. So happening, the reason that it implies space-time, or it is a function of space and time, or it's describing space and time, is because this, which is the object that exists, which is the state, right? It is in a state that happens, meaning there's a fluidity to everything. And that's where time comes in. So in the space-time constructs, right, that's why I have space-time. When there's fluidity of objects, right, one event after another, then you're starting to look at infinity, which is the same thing as time, right? The two are intrinsically linked. That's what happening is. It's starting to project into this infinity. You're starting to see a sequence of time, of events, because of the fluidity of the object. But again, this is the existential world down here. Up here is the metaphysical world. So the metaphysical world, ultimately, like, from it emerges the physical world, but it's not really physical. That's the whole point, right? So the cognition, right? The potential says, I am thinking, or I am. And by saying that, it includes its own projection outwards, so that it can be self-referential, so that it can look at itself and realize that it is. Therefore, the first axiom creates the second axiom, which is this is happening. And in order for this is happening to be an axiom, it must create an existential world. And that existential world refers back to the top. Why? Because when you say this is happening, It's saying, I'm thinking, that's what's happening, right? So it's self-referential in this manner. And this is why Roy and I, we are always in a round and round. Sometimes I'll say a statement and he'll say, no, there's really only nothingness and you're projecting into the future. And I'm saying, yeah, but there really, do you see what I mean? It's like the round and round that I'm talking about. And out of this round and round emerges the infinite and space-time, like I said, right in here. And that's where spiralism comes in. So what is the spiral? How do we reconcile the spiral in this theory, this unity theory? So that's really, we have now this beautiful kind of combination of these two axioms. You have to realize that because there is a thinking entity that creates a world, in this world, there are beings like us that continues creating thoughts and the sentience just continues forward and projecting forever in a spiral. But that spiral at the same time can collapse and is collapsed, right? So it's always, infinity is always just a series of numbers that collapses, as we said earlier. But in between time, if we want to observe the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it really is just more statements, right? More things that we can observe, in this reality. So you can add more lines that collapse into this triality of column, like these columns. I don't have any other examples at the moment, but Roy has in his triune model, you have different examples there. So, all right, let's move into the spiral. So, the way that I've reconciled spiralism is really, you have to look at it through the human-centric view, because humans are what are trying to encompass this level, and that's what spiralism is an interesting concept, because you can see the level and project that the other levels that are going to come afterwards. Okay, so when we say it's turtles all the way down, it doesn't have to be, but it is at the same time. Can we really define our turtle? Can we see our level? And this is what unity theory does. And here's how it looks like from the spiralistic point of view. You take the superposition, so that's paradoxism, which is describing the two aspects of God consciousness, right? So truth and awareness are interchangeable; they equate each other. But awareness, right, is the most fundamental thing we could say. So basically, let's start with truth. Human beings require truth. We search for truth, and ultimately there is truth. Absolute reality exists. So this truth is constantly resisting. It's constantly forcing consciousness to be aware, and human beings are limited. Therefore, we don't see truth so easily, but when we are encountering truth, it creates pain. So that's an experience in our human limited consciousness. And so truth leads to pain. That's the first level in the spiral. Pain is realization. So again, because everything collapses in on each other, every level in the spiral is really the same thing. They all kind of are nested into each other like a matryoshka doll. So when you have pain, it makes you realize something. Well, I have pain for a reason, right? There must be a reason. There must be a truth there. After you've realized, the truth through pain, it levels up into acceptance, and you have no choice to accept it, because you say, well, it's just the truth, and it's an absolute, therefore I can't change it. You can close your eyes and try to continue changing it, but again, reality is set in such a way that it's always forcing you towards truth. So this is why consciousness is leveling up, and we're getting more and more aware, self-aware, higher beings of consciousness, and so on. You have animals which are less conscious than us, and we're more conscious, and this is going to continue. All right, so now we have acceptance. We accept the truth that we are faced with. integration happens, meaning, okay, now we can, um, you know, use that we try to integrate the truth, meaning it's part of us. We make it part of our reality and how we project reality into reality, and therefore afterwards we can apply it in practice. So we can make decisions. That's where things become more practical. And paradoxism, my theory, dictates how we make practical decisions. But we'll get into that later. So these are the levels. And so when you're practicing truth, we're putting into practice everything that you've just integrated, which and accepted, and which is a realization of truth. So when you're practicing truth, it leads to more awareness because truth is awareness, right? So it's a constant flow of awareness. It's just a growing awareness and truth because it's a superposition. So this goes on forever, right? Now, this whole spiral, it, it it stretches out forever, but at the same time, it can collapse forever. So at any point, an individual can just return to the source, and the spiral will collapse for them. But being that the spiral is everything, and everything is projecting itself out again, there will always be a spiral at the same time, and no spiral, right? Again, this is the language that we have. We always have to say that it is and it isn't, and that's why paradoxism is really the theory that reconciles the other two theories. There we go. So ultimately, jumping continuity theory, just wanted to mention that real quick. That's the technical term for spiralism. It is pretty brilliant because it is a paradox in itself. Each level here is a jump, right? So you jump from pain to realization to acceptance and so on. But in order to jump, or this jump really occurs through a continuity, right? You need to like spiral upwards, in other words, right? To get to that next level, that next jump. Now we see jumps in things. That's what Daniel explains. We started with cellular life, multicellular organism, and so on. And then you can keep going. You have cities, you have countries, and so on and so forth. So this collection of groupings of things emerge through higher and higher levels of awareness, of consciousness. So that paradox really is resolved and not resolved always by thinking that this whole spiral can collapse. So there is no jump or continuity. It just all collapses. And at the same time, there is a jump in continuity, kind of like infinity, right? Infinity is a series of limited, like it's a finite. There's finite sections inside of something that has no beginning and ending. So it's a series of beginnings and endings, point A to point B. But on the outside of that, it's infinitely regressive. There is no beginning and no ending to the series of beginnings and endings. So it's that kind of paradox as well. Um, so there we go. That's JCT. Let's go now to this last thing. It's the symbol. Well, it's not the last thing, but this is the symbol for unity theory. It's the representative of everything that I've just discussed. The idea of triality, triune, which is these three columns that we can use to arrive at zero or potential or complete truth. And it necessarily includes duality. So this black triangle explains, well, it represents existence. The white one represents void or nothingness, which is generated by consciousness. And then the superposition between these two, of course, emerges the whole triangle, which is really gray. It's both combined. That's what paradoxism says. Existence coexists with non-existence. That's the whole reason for coexistence theory at the heart of paradoxism. So what does that look like? Well, ultimately, the spiral emerges from the top, from the zero potential. Oh, great, that's perfect timing. Hold on. Not yet. Graphic designers. Okay. So this spiral emerges from the zero nothingness potential, like we said. And Daniel, you see these levels. At some points, these levels get faster and faster. This is in spiralism. There's this code in a way, or it has to do with 1/3. Anyway, there's a specific number that determines the iterations of these spirals or these levels in the spiral, meaning it's getting faster and faster. So it projects infinitely into the past and into the future. So if you're here in the spiral, at the very center, you can look back at the levels, but it'll eventually collapse into nothingness or into infinity. And if you look into the future, the same thing will happen. But as you get closer and closer to the next paradigm shift, right, or the next collapse, which is another translation for it would be, which is just the next leveling up of consciousness, you can't see anything. There's a singularity there, right? So it looks like it ends, but it won't. I mean, once we leveled up, which is this paradox over here that binds everything together, it'll create another spiral, right? So that would be another dimension. So those beings or those entities at that point would require another unifying theory for their own dimension or their own whatever. So there you go. You have really the three theories encompassed in this symbol. I explained it better before because yeah, but now I'm getting a little tired. So all right, let's do a little recap. We have again these three. That's the absolute truth. We have the semantic definitions, like we said. Okay, yeah. So that basically means that so to show that a theory is complete, you need a semantic definition, so a reconciliation with language. So that's what this is exactly, and you also need to reconcile the language with geometry and mathematics. So that's what this is in a way. It gets more deep and more complex. Of course, there's a proof to this, but at the same time, it's not that complex. It's actually quite simple. I haven't described it here, but the point is there is a reconciliation between numbers and shapes and dimensions. This is also something that I described in Paradoxism. The dimensions emerge based on the numbers, and so reality exists and doesn't exist at the same time. So yeah, so we have a mathematical we have math, geometry, language all reconciled, and ultimately everything is unified. And then the question becomes like, what we do about it, or what are we doing? Because it's both. We are becoming more aware of what to do always, and what we are already doing. So ultimately, that what we're doing is that description. It makes you realize something very profound, which is that a theory of everything, a complete theory, is not just an idea or a symbol, right? It's a technology. It is a practical, something that you can apply practically. And I've written it here. I don't have any visuals for it yet. I just created these for now. So like this is the symbol. So a theory requires a symbol that encompasses everything. It requires the reconciliation of this triunistic kind of reality, what I call the Meta-Triune, right? Meta-Triune is the triune of triunes of reality, and you need to reconcile language and math and geometry. So I think we've done all that, and basically the truth is that it applies to everything. It applies to things as abstract as like art, and how to do it. And ultimately, it's all about achieving certain balance or a 0 point. And it can perhaps be applicable to things as pragmatic as engineering, law, mathematics, algorithms, and so on, which is why other people in their theories of everything are also working more on the side of spiralism. They're trying to apply, some kind of knowledge to the spiral, to reality, and the projection forward into everything. So there it is. I'm going to explain the technology of of unity theory another time in a separate video. There are some dangers that emerge there, and so it's perhaps something we have to be careful of before we really kind of just unleash it into the world. So there we go, 30 minutes, that's perfect. I'm gonna let it go, and that is unity theory.